Sweet. Good for you. That's so much.
Okay, we are live. I just want to make sure we don't get any feedback. So if we hear our voices come back, I just got to make sure to mute it.
Okay.
But I think we're good.
Okay, Nolan's with us.
That's correct. Can you hear me?
Get us started then. Call this meeting to order, the meeting of the City of Bowling Green's Planning Commission, our August 3rd meeting. Thank you for making it here tonight, all of you that are, and congratulations on finding your way into the building. That was the first test. And we even got you in here before you got soaking wet. Can't promise the same thing when the meeting's over. We'll see. Jamie, would you call the roll, please?
Here.
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 Okay, Mr. Phillips is ill tonight, so that's why we're down one. The next thing on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the July 6th and July 11th meetings. Those were distributed beforehand. Does anybody have any corrections, deletions, additions? Okay, then those minutes are approved as distributed. Next on our agenda is lobby visitation. The way I'm going to work this is, I know there's probably some of you that want to speak to us about the zoning code, and you'll get a chance to do that in a few minutes. Right now, lobby visitation is if anybody out there wants to speak to us about something other than the zoning code. Okay, seeing none, we'll close the lobby visitation. We'll go to our reports. We have a very light agenda tonight. It's mainly a work session on the zoning code. But Judy, do you have anything?
We did not meet last month and we're not meeting this month either.
All right.
We're taking a vacation.
Okay. Heather, do you have anything you want to know about before we start?
Yes, briefly, I just wanted to prep you for the next month's agenda. We received a referral from council to review a request for the designation of 328 East Court Street to be on the local historic register, which would include the historic overlay zoning. This was applied for by the property owner, so you'll see that on the next agenda.
Okay, with that, we will move on to the zoning code and our work session. I know that my objective tonight is to get through most of the items that we have left to cover. I don't expect to be completely done after tonight, but hopefully we'll get it down to a manageable number of items that will allow us to finish our work at our September meeting and pass this on to City Council. So that's what I'm thinking about as we go along here. We've tried to make the meetings accessible to people who want to come in and speak to us by doing more than just having a public hearing at our final meeting. We allowed the public to speak at our July meeting, and you also have an opportunity tonight, and you will have another opportunity at the September meeting as well. We're just trying to be available so you can pass your thoughts on to us if you want to. Now, how many people signed up to speak tonight?
Okay.
Let's see if it's. Okay. I just ask that you keep your comments to a reasonable time. A few minutes would be appreciated. And Heather, who do we start with?
Okay, we have Fern at 114 Buttonwood.
Okay.
As you know, I do live in the neighborhood, and
Pull the mic down so we can hear you.
the more I talk to people, nobody still knows about this. There has still been no article in the Sentinel Tribune about it. I want to know why homeowners, I understand we're only 38% of the city, but why have homeowners not received a letter telling us about the zoning? Are they not going to know about it until after you've finished passing it? I don't understand that. Why nothing in the Sentinel? Why no letters to anybody? Could I have an answer, please?
Well, I have seen articles, Pam, in the Sentinel about our planning commission meetings.
But not about this zoning was showing the map. Nothing. I read the Sentinel every day.
Well, there've been articles that they have chosen not to print a map.
And
But
why
it's a big map. I mean, even this, which. be like a
Why would
home, is
homeowners
pretty
not-
Hard to read.
not
And the BG
receive?
Independent News has had even a copy of this. in their
Yeah, the BG
paper.
Independent News has, but as I walk around my neighborhoods, and I walk a lot, it is a very walkable neighborhood. And anybody I talk to, none of them have heard about it. And I just don't understand why.
Okay, I think your first question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Peter, but I do believe that we have a Sentinel Tribune writer, correct, here tonight? So maybe you could direct that question to him.
Oh, that would be
because
wonderful.
We are not working with Sentinel.
No,
so-
of course not. I
Right.
understand
Well,
that.
you want an
Yes.
answer, so I'm
Yes,
just trying to give you an
good.
answer. Yes,
So someone is here
So-
from the Sentinel?
correct. And he's here every meeting.
Okay,
so-
and can something be published in the Sentinel so homeowners will be aware of it? I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
And my second question is, there's a small area on the map that seems to be Conneaut and that is excluded from the zoning map. I don't know why. It seems to be Conneaut, Morton, Wallace, and Meeker. There's a small area that is not filled in, and I wondered why that is. Because you say you want it to be walkable, and that walking to City Park is certainly walkable. And I just don't understand why that whole area is eliminated from the map.
I guess I'm not understanding what you mean by eliminated from the map.
Well, the
The
new
map does
zoning
cover the. it does
Map
cover
is
the whole area.
basically a rectangle, but there are little jogs. And one of the jogs is where Conneaut and Maple, Meeker, and Wallace and Morton meet. And that area appears to be excluded from your map. And I wondered why.
I'd have to see the area on the map. It's hard to read these small
Well-
streets, but every area is covered on the map. Anything that's in the city limits is covered.
It's not in the zoning map, your new zoning map.
This map.
This one?
That's not the one I have a copy of, but on the one I have, everything is colored in yellow except this little area of Conneaut, Morton, Meeker, and Wallace is not included. And I didn't understand why. And my last question is, what is the new zoning map going to do to Arlen's? Is it going to make it legal? Is it going to make it illegal? Is it going to change any of the times that Arlen's and other businesses may operate? So that would be my last question, please.
I'll look into your question about Conneaut, Morton, and Wallace.
Thank you.
Can't answer it on the spot. Okay, who's next?
David Wilson?
Hello, Dave Wilson from 208 Eberly. I did speak the other night at City Council, so I'm going to be mean old Uncle Dave again, speak tonight. Hopefully I'll get my words a little better, but I've got it typed up so I can give every one of you one, being the old school teacher in me as well. Just trying to cover bases. It looks like I probably won't make it to the September meeting. I'll be between St. Louis, Oklahoma City, and Montana. So tonight I'll just bark a little bit tonight and hopefully show up at the next one then. So it just take me a few minutes here. I'll go through it. As I stated, and now in addition to my comments from the June 20th, July 5th, July 6th, at the various city meetings with city council, city planning, when city administration, you guys need to clearly hear, consider, and be aware of the taxpaying property owners in the entire R2 district that is proposed to be changed to a PR, along with a M1 sliver, which might be changed to a B2 that's embedded in our district that's adjacent to two daycare centers without the citizens, residents, actually having a say or a vote. that M1 parcel should be either left M1 or designation should be logically and respectively changed to blend with our R2 district. We, the citizens of BG of many years, or most were born and raised here and moved into this R2 district as it was and as it is now. You may have plans to impact your forced will and compliance on us, or force us to leave and take our city and school taxes with us. If this approval of such a plan, we, the citizens, residents, may need to take action and force the city to a referendum and take it to the vote to the district's tax-paying citizens, residents, property owners at the city's expense of time, money, and public exposure of your actions and proclivities. Also, most of us older dogs, we don't do much with the social media platforms. So when you put notices and announcements out about meetings or whatever, a lot of us don't follow Facebook. So it's hard for us to know if and when something's going on to be joined into any of your possible meetings or things when you're going to bring something up to meet with the public to discuss your considerations. One final thing. Furthermore, regarding the sliver of the land of property at Hankey Avenue, it does not have adequate parking lot spaces without double parking on public streets, which the police would have to address and have in the past. The adjacent property owners will and have posted no parking tow-away notice signs on their lot entrances. And they are in the process of dealing with trespassers by controlling and repairing the fences that have been cut open to access between properties. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilson, I just say, I think your comments tonight are more directed at city council than they are the planning commission.
Technically they are, but as we know, it goes to you through your recommendation.
Right.
So the recommendation may carry some weight, but city council needs to know that there are a lot of people out there, residents, that we're concerned about changing our district. I know you're looking at the future, but currently we are the taxpayers have invested in the community, have invested in this district. To change it, future, whoever, be aware we're already here, can leave easily.
Okay, who's the third person, Heather?
Peg Baker.
Okay.
I'm Peg Baker. I live at 221 Eberly. I live on the corner of Eberly and Hankey. It is the stone house that has the other lot, and we have a greenhouse. We take great pride in that property.
Take immaculate care of.
And as I walk the neighborhood, I don't understand why you're changing the zoning. I do not understand it at all. Does someone own a lot of property in the areas that you have highlighted to change? Are they going to sell the houses they currently own and divide the property into smaller pieces of land and build more houses? We have businesses already around there. We have Home Comfort. We have Wood County buildings. We have a hardware store. We have, the automobile store. We have the warehouse. We have the two schools. So I don't understand the rationale. And I just wonder if you have all walked from Church to Poe. I mean, you have to take a little angle there to go over to Grove, and then Grove all the way to Sand Ridge, and then just go up Buttonwood, go up Maple. You just changed all the streets on Maple. You just did all that construction work on Church. It doesn't make sense what you're doing. And I'm just passionate about keeping the neighborhoods as it is. I don't know what other businesses you want to bring in or keep out, and I don't know what neighborhoods you think you're going to divide or want to divide. Which people in this community want to divide those lands? That's all I have to say. And I just feel passionate about living in that area. Thank you.
I would say, Ms. Baker, I've walked past your house many a time, and like I say, it's a beautiful place with immaculate care taken of it. One of the best cared for lots in the city. There's no ulterior motive here, though, with some large landowner or builder that is pushing us or pushing council to do this. It's the natural culmination of 8 years of planning documents that envision this type of zoning code. It is a modern trend in urban planning to integrate small businesses into neighborhood settings. A number of communities are doing it. That's sort of the general direction. The zoning code moves in that direction also. It's, I think that some of the comments I've heard from yourself and other folks in the area presume that if any business were to open up in a neighborhood setting, that's a bad thing for the neighborhood. I think those of us on the planning commission and the city officials, city administration, and the people that have been involved in these planning documents for the last 8 years don't share that sentiment. If we thought that opening any business in a neighborhood was going to be a bad thing, then I think we should throw the whole thing out and start over again. Why would we do something if it's uniformly 100% of the time going to result in something that's worse than what we have? The sentiment here, I think, on our part is that in a properly controlled environment, that small businesses can be an asset to the neighborhood and increase property values, not a detriment and decrease property values. So we just don't, we don't start from the presumption that some folks I know that live in those areas have, that any business opening up in a neighborhood would be a bad thing. So that's behind a lot of the thinking going into it, but it's not something we just came up as the city officials came up with as a harebrained idea completely out of the blue in the last 6 months. This has been in the making for at least 8 years. We've got planning documents that go back to at least 2014 talking about this type of thing. So this is sort of the natural result of those conversations.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think what you discussed are small.
Yeah.
It's already a mix of residential. So, of course, we understand what we're trying to do here, but I think your area, you're trying to say it's already done, correct? Correct.
There are businesses already in some of these neighborhood settings.
Mm-hmm.
True.
And in the vast majority of the cases,
You'd have to
the
come up with-
business owners get along just fine with the property owners, right?
Yes. So why couldn't that happen again if another business opened up?
I had no idea.
Yeah. Okay.
That's your point. Correct. Okay.
Okay. Mr. Wilson, if you keep it brief.
Oh, don't worry, it'll be brief. The businesses that are already there were there back in the day when the railroad tracks ran through there. So
No,
a lot of them were there by the railroad tracks. But a lot of things were never changed after the railroad pulled out of there. So a lot of things were kind of pre-established. They were there in the beginning, but adding more, the concern that we've got is, and there's less and less bricks and mortar stores. I'm doing a multi-billion-dollar venture in Oklahoma City, but it's bigger bricks and mortar stuff, the smaller business stuff. And in our neighborhood or any neighborhood, we live there. You don't. We live there. Put a business next to me. I don't want to have a business next to my house. I moved there to be residential. I didn't move there to be mixed with businesses. Most of us aren't considered to have that. And there are places we can walk to where the businesses already are and can thrive and improve. Okay.
Okay.
I do want to note, I think we have a tendency to look back maybe 10 to 30 years when we talk about the community. But if you go back further than that, I've heard so many accounts from locals about there's a little neighborhood grocery store that was, in the middle of the PR just in the 40s, right? So communities change and evolve over time. We did used to have some of these little businesses in this district. They predated when a lot of us, certainly me, were here. So I know I'm optimistic that as long as we do this carefully, wherever we land, it is going to look a little bit different 5 or 10 years from now than it does today. But it's going to look different anyway. We can't stay rooted in one moment. It's going to keep changing and evolving. So we just have to be careful and intentional about it and not pretend that the way it is today is the way it's always been and the way it always should be. Because that's just not.
Okay. Thank you, Will. Okay, let's move into our work session now. We're ready to do that. Where we left off was we were talking about Will Earhart's comments that he had sent to us a few weeks ago now.
Should we not finish them? I thought we finished these, Bob. I
No,
apologize.
we stopped at the corner store. Yeah, we were at 150.51.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let me quickly, I say that optimistically, move on to, I guess, should I go to 150.59 or have we not done the corner store yet?
I thought we did the corner store.
Well, let me look at what we passed and didn't pass.
Okay, so
No,
this
we
one
didn't
actually is
vote on
easy.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where my line is too.
This one's easy. I think in the, if I recall, yeah, in 150.51, there's uses that are spelled out there, and I had proposed a new section E to add to it that just says that the planning director at their discretion may allow additional commercial uses upon application. So the idea being that that set of A through D is not limiting, but is actually just, examples of things that can be approved.
Yeah, and I think Nolan agreed with that.
Nolan wisely agreed
Okay.
with my perspective.
So I'll make a motion. I don't think we need to spend much time on this or discuss it. I'll make a motion that we approve that language as section E in subsection E in 150.51. That wording being, as Will just said, the planning director at their discretion may allow additional commercial uses upon application.
I'll second it.
Okay. Amy, go ahead and call the roll.
Yes.
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 Okay, moving on, 150.59. I think that we did establish that the city attorney was involved in drafting this language.
I think I don't have much additional to say other than I flagged it in my review as, hey, make sure that this is one for council, especially to really to dig into and make sure they're on the same page with the city attorney.
Okay. Moving to 150.66, telecommunication facilities. How do we want to handle this? I know what you mean about antennas that look like trees. I've seen a few of them.
Yeah, they're like ugly, but they're less ugly than normal antennas. And if I can imagine a future, this wireless 5G, 6G, 7G future, right? Where there's going to be more of these things. And I can appreciate that if they become closer to in town, et cetera, we might want to have a, I don't know what the right word is, cloaking requirement, right? Masking requirement. I should say mask, but cloaking requirement of some type.
Those around.
Right.
You can drive by and see how are they.
On 475.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
exactly right. Yeah. You see that.
Yeah,
So maybe we just, for now, at least at this point, unless you want to have a broader discussion of that, of 150.66 right now, just generally that we recommend to city council that they include
that they consider some sort of masking capabilities or
I
requirements.
agree.
Okay, should we vote on that? Or not? It's a general recommendation as opposed to specific
I think it's
language.
just a general
You have any
recommendation.
thoughts, Heather?
I'm trying to make sure we capture them consistently in that one document. I don't want to encourage all the voting, but I mean, if it is helpful to have it all in that one document
Okay.
that we're forwarding,
so I could move.
unless we want to touch base with Nolan quick and see if he has some
Sure.
recommended spot or language.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Nolan.
thank you, Heather. Can you hear me okay?
Can't
No.
hear
I
you.
can't hear you.
We could
Okay,
kinda
just one.
turn it up.
Can you hear me?
No.
Okay, can you hear
Can't
me?
hear you at all.
It's worse. Now we can't hear you at all.
Dang. Okay.
That's better.
That was better.
Okay, very good. I'll just try to speak loudly. So a lot of the 5G technology that's coming out, in terms of antennae, those are short range antennae. So typically they have to have more of them. However, the antenna that they have are often smaller. So a lot of the ones that you may have seen either in Bowling Green or in other cities are approximately about 8 to 12 inches in diameter. They're usually cylindrical and say about 3 feet by a foot cylinders. And these are oftentimes placed on top of existing utility poles within the city. So potentially on top of a light fixture, a street light fixture, or on top of an electricity transmission pole. So you can see them. They are not huge. They are not super tall. I'm speaking specifically about the 5G transmission antenna. But you do notice them. So there are cities that have standardized them so that they're all gray or they blend into the color of the existing pole. For example, if they're put on top of a wooden pole, they could be browner in color. If they're put on top of a metal steel pole, they would be gray in color. Other ones that are closer to the pedestrian, lower to the ground, they've put in some screening standards. Now, any of those placed on the public right-of-way are not going to be dictated by the zoning code, which largely focuses on private land use. But it would affect if somebody was mounting one, for example, on their homes. And there are utility companies reaching out to private homeowners to ask them to place these antenna on their homes, on their structures, etc. Typically, there's some incentive for the homeowner, such as free internet or something of that nature. So there is the case that these would be on private land. And in that case, there could be standards to help hide them from public view.
There you go.
There.
Okay.
So basically he said exactly what we were saying.
Yeah.
Just seal them.
We recommend the city council
Correct.
So
have some type of coverage.
the current language does cover,
They will,
the current language does address color.
and
I
contrast, yeah.
I was thinking
Okay.
more specifically about
Oh.
any additional.
I know.
Well, you want to make a motion, Will?
Yes, I move that we instruct council to consider whether any additional camouflage or similar disguising of antenna are warranted or is
Tower.
warranted or is
Okay.
warranted.
Okay. I think we recommend to city council,
Yeah,
not
we
instruct.
instruct,
city
yeah.
council-
I was gonna say,
city
let's
council.
be a
We
little more
direct-
quick.
We recommend to city council that they consider what you said about
Yes.
camouflage,
Yes.
masking. Okay, and somebody second it? Erica, you did?
Erica was going to second it, I think.
I will, but I wasn't. thought of that. I get the.
Okay, are you okay, Jamie? Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and vote on it.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, 8-0. Who to goes, Will?
Yes. Regretfully, this next one is important. 159.8 Planning Director Decisions, Conditional Uses. This is, I think, to the extent that we've made changes so far that build on the idea that we want to have flexibility in this code and that the Planning Director has discretion. This provision is kind of a key point. So I had suggested to everyone that the criteria, there are 5 criteria in this section 159.8 in which that the planning director shall find in when they are granting conditional use approval. I had suggested that I wasn't clear in the way it's drafted. It wasn't clear to me whether this was prescriptive or permissive. So in other words, you find these 5 things and it's like you put in your quarter, you get your gumball, right? So if you meet the 5, you're good, or whether there was some discretion retained by the planning director such that if there were some exterior reason that a conditional use was a terrible idea for the community, notwithstanding the fact that it did not neatly fit within these 5 criteria, which if you look at them, they're very good criteria, ingress and egress, not a threat to public safety, won't overburden services, won't have a negative impact on environmental quality, doesn't conflict with the plan. So if there is some independent reason it's a bad idea, I wanted to make sure the language is clear that the planning director can still say no. So that was my suggestion, that if we agree as a group that that is the intent, then I do think make that clear in the language, because when I read it, I did not think it was clear.
Nolan made 2 comments about that, or suggestions that the introductory language be changed to no conditional use shall be approved except when the planning director finds in their professional opinion that the 5 things. And he also suggested that perhaps the planning director be able to refer the application to the zoning board of appeals in particularly difficult cases. He was a bit hesitant to give the planning director as much discretion as your suggestion
Correct.
called for.
Correct.
Any thoughts?
I do have a point though. So I mean, B and D kind of talks about public safety and health, which is physical form, and D talks about environmental. And I was wondering, like, what about quality of life? If something is affecting quality of life of the residents, which, is not public health, but it's like their peace or something like that. And I think that could be one criteria in which the director can say, this will affect the residents' well-being and hence can't be granted. So I was hoping that there would be some language kind of capturing quality of life or well-being of the citizens in mind, not just their physical well-being and also environmental degradation.
So
And so-
put that as one of the questions as
Yes,
well.
yes.
Correct.
And some of that will take a long time. For instance, environmental degradation will take 10, 15 years for it to show up. So we want something which will be immediate.
My own. Obviously,
I-
that is important factor. That seems like more of a subjective item to me. Quality of life. When your vision, my vision.
Sure.
But I think we're just talking about the planning, correct? Because they're all sorry, to interrupt, Mark, all of the conditions are really about the planning direction point of view. I mean, we can all look at all the 5 current criteria and say, well, this is this, that, what I'm looking for.
Just
So,
when I think about health issues, if there's radon in a home, it's either above the EPA accepted levels or it's not. So it's a health risk or it's
Right.
not a health.
but I
Either
also
one.
think, right, correct. But after taking care of people for over 30 years, I look at it as quality of life just as important as that. Just as important. So if quality of life thing, then I would hope planning director that could also be.
Mhm.
But I mean, like, I believe as that's just as important.
The one thing that we're talking about here, I think the way I had originally set it up was a new part F that says, or other criteria, planning director shall, right, something
Mhm.
And
like
what
that.
he's saying is,
And-
can we just
and-
add
and what I-
quality of life?
And what
Like,
I, yeah,
include
and what
all
I've
of
heard
that,
Abhishek
correct?
say.
Yes.
Abhishek, right?
Yeah, and then we can, my concern with these are, there is an intersection of economic intersection when it comes to economic and environmental well-being. For instance, we know that poor lives in lead houses and they continue to live in the lead houses and they may not be even able to go and get screened for years. So, I mean, okay, we can say, well, there is no lead detection or nobody is going to clinic, but they are getting exposed to it, right? But if we have some more of a qualitative, and I do really understand your point here, Mark, but there are few things which we know will directly affect people's well-being. For instance, loud music playing at midnight. I mean, I don't know if anybody can debate that's good. I mean, I don't know, maybe 1 out of 100, but I think for most people are pretty much sincere about what they think is quality of life.
I guess my concern about that is that it almost, like what Nolan's saying, it gives the planning director a little more discretion than I
right.
think that I'm comfortable with. we have a very good planning director right now. We're not gonna maybe always have such a good one.
That's very true.
May take on, you know, a little bit more. Nolan, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to say, can you hear me okay?
Oh, we can hear you
Yes,
loud and
now.
clear right
Okay.
now.
So what I wanted to say is, at least what I'm understanding about this conversation is that currently, as the draft is written, the planning director is not allowed, essentially by the language, to grant that conditional use approval unless A, B, C, D, E are met. However, if A, B, C, D, E are met, there is nothing in the language that says the planning director must grant that conditional use approval. Is that what this conversation was brought up
Yeah,
around?
so
Okay.
Nolan, I guess that you and I have an interpretive difference in how we review it. And you very well might be right in terms of how these types of documents are normally interpreted. But I know for me, as someone who drafts language all the time, when I read it, I was concerned that what we were doing was tying the hands of the planning director to say, once that application comes in, meet these criteria, they got to rubber stamp it. It doesn't explicitly not say that. And my thought was, if that's what we don't want, we need to make sure it doesn't say that, regardless of whether we put in other things or not, because that felt like a bad idea. So another way to address this might be not adding any other new criteria at all, but just before you get to the criteria, clarify that if we want to do that, that it is not as simple as somebody applies and demonstrates these items. Now, I will say, Nolan, in looking at the language you sent, you did switch it around a little bit, which I appreciate. So you wrote no conditional use ... shall be granted unless, and I do think that's a much better way of framing it. I still feel a little bit that still leads to the same outcome, but it at least does set it up in the right framing, which I appreciated when you sent that, because I think the way it was originally drafted framed it other direction, which I did not. But we have to decide as a group whether if we're still comfortable with that or not.
And also do keep in mind that if a permit is not granted, you know, an applicant can take that to the zoning board of appeals. So there is some ability to appeal that decision in any case.
Does the planning director have the ability to hand it off without making now?
It's pretty much the same way. It's just that
Yeah.
right now it's very vague. The section has maybe one tiny paragraph. So this actually gives a lot more I guess you'd say criteria, the discretion to be able to review something.
Will, it's really a two-part question. Do we want it to be, if you hit all 4 or 5, whatever criteria, automatic? Or do we want it to be, still have the discretion, right? And then if, I guess, depending on the answer to that, then do we add other criteria regarding quality of life? Framing that correctly?
Yeah, and the context is all of the little C's added to the table, right?
Sure.
Which are automatically going to get kicked to planning. And whether, as we did that, I think, and at least in part, this shouldn't be automatically approved in neighborhoods.
Right.
So if that's why we did that, then we need to make sure that it's robust process versus something that.
And although you don't have anything in particular in mind, you bring up this possibility that there could be a suggested use that doesn't fall afoul of any of the 5 listed criteria, but still you can clearly tell or think that it's a terrible use for that neighborhood.
I was gonna earlier,
Which seems like a
finish my
legitimate
thought.
concern to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I actually like what I said about quality of life.
Mhm.
That is approximately what I was, without knowing quite how to capture that. And from a granting too much discretion perspective, that was, for me, hearing him say that, that was granting less discretion than I think what I had originally proposed, which if I didn't write it, I certainly think said it as some version of, whatever else the planning director wants to You couldn't grant more discretion.
Right.
So I liked how.
So something like the proposed use does not adversely affect the quality of life of nearby residents.
At least want to add a materiality.
Well, we can add the 7 principles. We can go back, quality of life probably defined by the BG 7 principles. I
Yes.
mean, yeah, so we could tie it to what 7 principles are coming from research, what people want from the community, and quality of life is reflected through those 7 things. And that probably how, the blind actor can look at this is quality of life based on those 7 principles, if you want to do that way.
A nice way to tie it to
Yeah.
this thing.
So how do we do that?
Well, one way we do. They ask council to have to
Here's what we recommend.
Here's what
Here's
we
what we
recommend,
recommend.
not here's what you
add
should
some
do.
type of quality of life qualifier based on the existing planning document. that
We
is-
recommend.
We can also do that now and come back to it by our September. Could take on.
Okay, I like the latter alternative.
Okay.
And I'm kind of looking at you when I think about who should draft that.
Kind of.
You
What I'll do is
you
I'll draft it and I'll send it to you first.
Okay, how about the two of you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a way? Yeah. I'm in agreement with audio. But yeah, I can half a dozen, I think, totally effective. And different opinions on the same neighborhood.
Yes.
Is there some way to take that out? If
Yeah.
there is, you're an attorney. Maybe there's trying
When drafting, avoid
subjectivity.
avoid the property versus property subject.
Yeah.
Fine. I appreciate that concern. I will think about it.
Okay, let's see what you can come up with.
Can I add one more thing to your thought process? You're making a lot of assumptions that these are near residential and, many times they won't be.
Right.
So I just want to be
Yeah.
clear that that's not always going to be the criteria. And then, downtown, how do you apply that to downtown where, their purpose is living in the center and the heart of the city and the upper levels of buildings. So, what's the measurement of quality of life? To me, that's what I would struggle with in my position right now. It's very subjective. So that's a big concern for mine. I'd almost want to run that through a board or commission to figure that out, not me. I'm just feeling a little bit uncomfortable with what that looks like. And from a legal standpoint.
I think there will be some consensus of how to define quality of life from some research out there. I don't believe that this is the first time we're inventing this wheel. So what people kind of believe what quality of life is and how flexible that is, we can look at certain definitions and I can throw that around and we can work with those.
Okay. Let's see what we come up with.
Do we need to?
I would also, sorry, I don't want to interrupt anybody.
Go ahead.
I would also add that maybe with that language, it's that this proposed use may generate a more intense impact on quality of life than otherwise permitted uses. So obviously any use, whether it's a house with 2 people in it, that's going to cause a negative quality of life change for a next door neighbor because right now it's just woods and now it's being cut down and turned into a house. But a house may be the same impact as some other already permitted use.
Yeah, we'll definitely need to add a materiality qualifier, no matter what.
Are we still comfortable with the rest of the languages? Are we reading that? Because I get where you're at on your initial read that.
I will
Is
I will come back with a new 159. That will be mostly what's here, but what will circulate will just be a red line against the existing.
Okay.
I'll type it out.
Okay, last item, I think we can probably dispose of pretty quickly. Has to do with notice in newspapers. And I think we just basically do whatever we're legally required to do.
Yeah, I think I didn't know if we had an existing general notice ordinance in the city, and if not, I was really just lamenting it in writing.
Yeah.
So I don't think
It's
we
an-
really need
I
to
don't think
address
there's
it.
anything for us.
It's
to
the
do.
Ohio Revised Code.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we always have the Ohio Revised Code to read.
Okay, we're done with that. Oh,
Before we get off of. I
okay.
didn't want to interrupt. Well. Can we go back and look at 150.54 home occupation?
150.54. Okay, that helps. 55.
And I just have a general question. So when I read through this, we get to letter D of that section. I put a question mark about what if somebody is an Uber driver or does DoorDash? They run their business out of their home. And this talks about increased traffic volume in and out of 4 hour. So does that fall in as a home occupation? Does it not? Is it covered somewhere else, Heather or Nolan, in this document, or is it just up in the air?
So I think the distinction would be that because you occupy the home, you're not bringing other people to,
That-
but I don't know if it says
And
that.
that's a good distinction.
Yeah.
But it just says traffic volume and vehicle trips. So if it's vehicle trips and I'm an Uber driver and I do 3 trips in an hour, I come home and I get another call and I do another trip. That's an increased volume of trips out in and out of.
I would personally believe that it's really a case by case scenario. Based on the definition, the last sentence basically says an incidental use of a residential dwelling unit, and that does not alter the exterior of the property or affect the residential character of the neighborhood. I think if they're, having 21 trips back home in one day, to me, that would, upset that residential character. But if he's literally leaving his house, he or she, at 8 o'clock and coming back at 8 p.m., then it wouldn't. So
And I think the reality was down. They tried. I think
Yeah.
that is the business model for them. What I don't want is the restriction to not allow somebody to be able to do DoorDash or don't disallow. That's
If
the
we,
reason.
Mark, what if we 150.54 to address your concern, because I agree that as drafted, we can argue. That's fair. What if we added at the first sentence, but the home occupation shall not cause significant increases in traffic volumes of the street fronted by the home occupation. And then something to the effect of by people other than the person occupying.
And that would satisfy my concern. Yeah.
I like that suggestion.
Okay. Home occupation shall not cause significant increases in traffic volumes on the street fronted by the home occupation. And then your wording was added.
By
Month-
people
By
other
people
than
other-
The property owner.
Or,
Uh,
no, it
No.
may not be a
No.
property
No.
owner. either. It
the
could
person
be-
occupying the home.
Okay, okay.
To use the language of
Home
that
occupier,
phrase,
yeah,
the,
okay.
by the person occupying.
I'm sorry. to go
Okay.
backwards, But I think there's clarification.
Mhm.
That is.
So then I move to recommend city council amend 150.54D. To add the end of the first sentence by people other by persons other than the person occupying home. Yeah, I was just using the language.
I see the concern. I don't get where this ever comes up.
It doesn't. I mean, I can't even get into.
It's the,
There's not one.
I do the Grubhub and I go home
I get
And then I
that,
go out and then I go home.
but you know how many times I go back and forth in my house?
I
If
was
I
gonna say,
forget
I was just
something
saying the
anyway,
same
who's
thing.
gonna
Me too.
notice? Who's
Me
gonna
too.
I
ever bring
literally
this
take
up?
my bus, that
Yeah.
bus that I drive.
Get a
I take
clicker.
that bus home 3 or 4 times a day and pull out in front of my
Just-
house,
you
run in,
forget
let the
your
dog out, come back.
Phone
run
or
in, let
something,
the
whatever,
dog out,
yeah,
come back.
stuff, I mean,
I've never counted before, but
Yeah.
I would not want somebody telling me I could not do that.
there are days that.
And I think that's what he's trying to say. He doesn't want people to say
Yeah.
that my
yeah.
home, I can come back and go as often as I would like. There shouldn't be any restriction.
Yeah.
Correct, Mark? Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're 100% right.
Okay.
Do I have a
So-
second?
that's fine.
So, but I'm kind of curious,
For
what's the
once, I
reason
actually
for
checked
having
on
this? Like, why do we have this in the first place? Like, why do we have this clause? Like, what are we trying to address here by that clause? I don't know.
You're trying to address a home business that has 50 people a day swinging by. That's really disrupting the neighborhood,
I think-
clogging up the streets. That's the.
But
that's
if
the
we,
purpose of it.
A home
Sure.
business in R1, for example, so where it's not.
so in that case, it should be as a business rather than as a homeowner, right? So in that, if
Correct.
the person, okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I get the concern. I just have a hard time imagining a scenario where it actually becomes an issue.
Obviously, maybe. But like,
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt anything to add that language though, does it?
Yeah, I just wanted to know. That's all.
Yeah,
I think it's
Yeah.
actually going to be helpful should someone actually have an office home and then they start accepting clients.
okay. So your motion was by persons other than the person occupying the home. Okay, you made a motion, I
have-
second it. I don't see any harm in doing that.
Right.
Jamie?
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay. That's okay. All right, now we move on to the next item, review and discuss accessory dwelling units on pages 50 and 51. And, this is something that is kind of a hot item in urban planning these days. My wife watches a lot of HGTV. I hear them talking about ADUs all the time. And I want to make sure that we're okay with what we've got here. I didn't bring it up or put it on the agenda because there's anything I particularly object to, but it's something that is not addressed in the current zoning code. And the one concern I had when I first heard about the ADUs was basically taken care of. I'll point out in a second. My concern was, when I first heard about it, was that I didn't want every rental property in the first and second wards to end up having an additional unit to rent because somebody wants to have an ADU by finishing the portion, the attic above their garage kind of thing, in those areas where we already have a ton of rentals and are arguably in places overcrowded anyway. But it was added on to this section that either the principal dwelling unit or the accessory dwelling unit must be occupied at least 180 days a year by the owner of the lot or structure. And with that limitation, then I'm not concerned about the fear that I initially had happen. That was the biggest issue to me. You notice section 9 there, we talked a little bit about this before. An off-street parking area of at least 300 square feet must be provided on a lot with an accessory dwelling use. That's essentially 2 parking spaces, I'm told.
That's one parking space. One parking space typically is about 200 square feet, sometimes 180 square feet. The 300 square feet would be one parking spot with a little bit of maneuvering room.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody have any concerns about adopting ADUs and bringing that into the zoning code? We okay with that?
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Is there a concern? I mean, we've got square footage restrictions, we've
Yeah.
got height restrictions too. What's the thought process of how you came up with those specific numbers, Nolan?
Can you say that again, please? I couldn't hear that.
I just said that there are size and height restrictions for ADUs that were set in here. How are those come up with, or how did you follow?
Yeah. So of course, with any number, typically these are arbitrary in some regard in nature. There's a line in the sand that we must draw. So for those of you listening who don't have access to this document, the question was, why were the size, the area of the accessory dwelling units and the height regulated, and how are those numbers come up with? So the part 7 says no accessory dwelling unit may exceed 1,200 square feet of GFA, which is gross floor area. And part B of 7 says if an accessory dwelling unit is detached from the principal structure, it shall not exceed 18 feet in height. How are these come up with? I would have to try to remember back.
Well, I can insert the pretty clear comment that under garages, that's where the 18 feet came from. Because we
Because
figured,
other
why would that be
garages are
allowed? Why would
18
that be
feet.
different?
Okay, thank you, Heather. That must be what we did.
We mirrored garages under accessory structures because we figured that's the same thing in some circumstances.
I think there are some what would be considered an ADU now in town where there's an apartment above a garage.
Right.
And would that exceed 18 feet in height? Probably would. And they're already in place now.
Right.
To me, that's too restrictive. And that's why I bring it up is we specifically have some in town now that would be over 18 feet in height, and they're being used as rentals right now.
Right.
The 1,200 square feet. So part of the reason
I was
for
talking about the height.
limiting.
I was talking about the height.
Okay. Did you want me to refer to the gross floor area as well?
I don't know that I need you to refer to anything. My comment was that I think we have some that are being used in this manner today, and that they would want to continue to use in that way that cannot meet that height restriction.
Okay, so, but what I'm, that's 18 feet from the ground up, correct?
Correct.
Correct, okay. What you're talking about, they're above a home. So,
It'd be above a garage.
Above a
There's
garage.
so it's above a garage, so, or. it
It's
could-
detached, which just says that if it's
Correct.
detached, it can't be over 18.
So is there a way that we could add something that, and garage is not the dwelling, or not the living dwelling? We're talking about living, correct? Not just dwelling that's a garage for a car.
So the living dwelling is above the garage.
Correct, correct. So I guess what I'm saying is we add something as if both of them are not used for a living dwelling. Like if the garage is actually a garage and we extend it a little bit higher, dwelling above the garage, is that what you're asking?
I guess what I would rather say.
Get rid of the
I
height
wouldn't even
restriction.
worry about discriminating whether it's above a
Okay,
garage or not,
okay.
and I would just raise the height.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
That's what I'm
So
saying.
that you can allow one above a garage. So
Correct.
how high? How high would?
I would direction on how high is 2 stories. I'm asking, I don't.
25, 20,
So like I have a garage.
20,
Yeah,
25.
and this
This is
specifically says
detached,
detached.
detached,
Yeah,
correct.
and there are
Yeah.
properties.
There are
And
currently,
Yeah, yeah.
currently. Yes,
If
there
it's
are.
like 25.
Probably
What's
20
that,
feet,
Tom?
probably 20, 20.
This gets back to our, we touched on previously height restriction in general.
We're gonna talk
And this
about
might
that
be
more,
more,
yeah.
sure, it's
Mhm.
kind of leads into a
Yeah.
broader discussion. Yeah, no height. I can think of one, I think specifically that fits exactly what you're talking.
I don't-
And
I don't think
that's
anybody in the
over
neighborhood
20 feet
wants to
high.
see anything that's worse.
Right,
Like I get it,
right.
and I'm not advocating, but I am advocating for.
An apartment above a garage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to be flexible.
Just wanna be
Second
flexible.
story of garage without. Right.
Correct.
So we make it 25.
25s. Yeah, yeah.
It
We're
might
off
be a
by a
little
foot.
higher than we need, but
Can you guys get on board with that?
As long as the owner still has to live in the
Right.
principal
Which is part of the
structure.
dwelling, yes, which
That's
is part of the
100
rules right now.
180 days
Yes,
a year.
yes.
And what if there's no garage and then 2 stories?
I'm sorry,
What if
Okay.
there's no garage, then 2 stories?
I still believe it should still be. Yeah, 2 stories.
could just say 2 stories instead of a height restriction.
The city changed their language previously to not do stories. They went to feet. Is that
Correct, yes.
What was the reason? Guess I don't.
Well, again, building in that kind of the architectural features that you could make a building look appealing instead of counting on the floors. You could have a higher ceiling on the first floor and aesthetically make it look nice, a little more flexibility.
I would think more flexible floors. I want to make for 16 ceiling, nice and open, and second floor is 12. Now I'm over 25.
Yeah, I think we're just trying to paint the picture of it's within residential areas, making sure that character was really maintained, that there's a primary structure and a secondary potential.
It's getting
Living
pretty
unit.
big for an accessory building.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had
Yes,
thought
yes.
you could
Problem.
not two-story accessory. I thought it had to be
Yeah, I was about to ask that
just
question.
one unit.
It's giving
And maybe I'm
yeah.
misreading, and that's part 5. No lot may contain accessory dwelling.
Right.
I had thought, I had read that to you. One, truly an 80, not I add on, suddenly I've got. I thought that was not.
Yeah, they can always ask for a variance. If they.
Yeah.
18 feet.
Well, no, so I'm fine with the height. I was trying to express, sorry, with raising the height.
Sure, I understand.
But my point was to say, I wasn't worried about somebody built. I just have a house. I have no garage. Don't have a car. That I affirmatively build a 2-story view under that 25-foot limit. Just, and then I've got 2 apartments.
You're saying you have an upper and a lower.
Right.
Right.
My point is to say, no, you've built one, regardless of how you divvy that
Okay,
up.
hang on, just the. We
But
have in
I
there
might
that
have misread it.
The
It's kind of,
1,200 square feet on the
Nolan,
gross
can-
floor
Nolan,
area.
can you
though.
clarify that?
you do. That's right.
So how are you gonna have it, I mean, if you have the gross floor area and it's gross floor area or the sum of the areas of all floors of the interior of the building. Is that first floor, second floor? Am I reading that
It's
right?
Plural.
So you're gonna have a 600 square foot downstairs and
Keep the
600 square
1,200.
foot upstairs. I mean, how? That's gonna be the weirdest shaped 2-story building I've ever seen. It's gonna be your,
Not really.
the
My
antenna.
house, the house that I live in, now I bought it for 500 square. I could have another house on top of it at 500. Like less than 12. Just that I
that's what I'm
decided
trying
to
to
go back.
envision. Is that, and that's where, does the gross floor area not encompass what we're talking about? Or is multi-stories, you see, would be combined with
Right,
gross floor, combined with
So they would
whatever
be
height
very,
we're
very
putting in.
I
small.
think my point is to say, if we don't want to allow standalone, then we should.
Right.
And
Right.
I thought it already
Right.
said that, but as I was reading it again, listening to the conversation, I thought, maybe it doesn't.
It does
It just
say.
says it can't have more than one.
no
Right.
lot
Yeah,
may
it says
contain more than
one.
Correct.
Other
Can't
than
have more
one
than one.
unit.
Yeah.
Right.
Doesn't mean
And
it
I'm
can be 2
definitely for
stories.
that. I can't have more than
Sure.
like 3 5-foot.
Mark, your point was that if you had a garage with an apartment above it,
That was my
So-
initial.
I mean,
That's what
Yeah.
that's
made
what
me
we're
think
really
about
talking
it, is
about.
that we have structure be over that height.
And that's what I thought. Was the garage was a garage, not a dwelling. Not no one's garage, car, garage. What you're saying, what it's saying right now,
Based on
if
what I
my garage is
read,
18
that
feet,
is the ADU.
then I can't have a dwelling on that above the garage. So yeah.
But we do have to be careful. People do live in garages here, right? So so I'm with Will here. Let's be explicit about the language. We want this to be ADU, not any additional rental property. So if somebody wants to put people in the garage and there are people interested in living in the garage, that's not right.
Well, it can be. You live in property, basically. But what it can't be, what I was saying, it can't be. But that
Right.
felt like, and
Right.
getting into the rental business, just felt.
Mhm.
So let's figure this out. I want to talk about owner occupied. There are non-owner occupied properties will be in this district that have an ADU that are owned by There are some.
They're legal non-conforming and they would remain legal non-conforming.
Okay, so they would remain.
Yes.
What's our intent here with the ADUs? To limit them to, are we intending to limit them to one or two persons? They could be, I mean, there's talk about mother-in-law suites or additional renters. The way the zoning, Nolan, the way this zoning code is written, is there any, what's the limitation on how many people could move into an accessory dwelling unit?
Right. So the language regarding accessory dwelling units does not limit the occupancy. The limit of 1,200 square feet could be typical of a 2-bedroom dwelling with a living room, kitchen, and dining room. So that's 1,200 would be a typical 2-bedroom size. We can go down to occupancy here. Just one moment, please. Occupancy is mentioned in 150.59. And the accessory dwelling unit refers to that section. Occupancy is limited to an individual or a family as defined in the zoning code, plus 2 persons unrelated to the individual or the family, plus 1 additional person unrelated to the individual or the family for each additional bedroom over 3. It would be highly unlikely that you would have over 3 bedrooms in a 1,200 square foot unit. So essentially you're limited to a family as defined plus 2 persons.
Okay. A family plus 2 persons.
A family or an individual plus 2 additional people who are not family to that individual or family, right?
It contradicts to change language in 7.
Also, just to comment, it is difficult for me to hear certain people. Certain people are extremely clear, other ones are not. And I do think that it's related to the closeness of the microphone. Just a comment, because there may be other people watching this on YouTube who also are only getting half of the conversation.
I apologize. Yeah, I wasn't close to the microphone. Is that better?
Yes, that's way better. Very clear. Thank you.
Is it contradictory to change or to make a motion to change that to stories versus feet? And I know gone otherwise to go to feet and not stories, but
You know, I always go to enforcement, and enforcement's really difficult when it's not stipulated by numbers, in my opinion. But again, we'll do whatever planning commission wants to recommend.
explain that, how enforcement is off if it's.
If
by
someone
floor.
comes in and says 2 stories, you know, what is the height limit? So that doesn't have a height limit, but the house does. The house can only be 35 foot tall. You know, see what I'm saying? Like it doesn't really make sense if you want it to be consistent with the other zoning districts and keeping
And I
it
asked
to
because
look
I
right.
care. I
Right.
don't want it to be all
Sure.
over the board and not make sense.
Right.
Okay.
And then they still have to follow the building code, what that states. So that's a whole other issue.
Well, let me go back to this. The situation where somebody has a garage and they say, hey, I can finish the top half of the garage and rent it out to somebody. Is that something that we want to allow with accessory dwelling units or not allow? The idea behind the 18 feet is that the garage will be too tall, so you won't be able to do that. And
I don't agree.
and
with
yours,
that.
Mark doesn't agree with that, and he says that there are places in town where that's already being done, but like you said, that's legal non-conforming
Right.
and would continue to be legal non-conforming.
The
So
question is,
I'm
do we want
asking,
going forward?
do we want going forward to allow that or not? Which I think if we do, then maybe 25 feet is what we should go to, and if we don't want to allow that, then we stick with the 18.
And I can envision, Bob, a situation where there's a current homeowner on North Prospect that has their single family home and no garage, nothing behind the house. And they may say, I'd love to have a garage and a rental above it. And I can kill two birds with one stone.
Mhm.
And I could envision that happening.
Yeah.
And I would not want to prohibit that. If we're going to allow ADU, I would not want to prohibit personally.
It would seem, I think, if I'm understanding correctly, it would seem a perverse outcome if we said, if it's one story standalone, fine to rent it out. But if it's above a garage, because it's gonna hit this height requirement, that's when we say can't. It seems like the real question is, let's gut check that we're cool with the rental question. And if you are, then I would think we would be ambivalent as to whether it is, assuming it
Whether it's a
conforms with the
separate unit
neighborhood,
or
as to whether it's
above a
above a garage or on the first floor. Is that consistent with what you're saying, Mark? Okay.
And don't forget, you made them conditional uses, except in one district, so there's still all the other criteria they have to meet too.
It has to be said.
The A through potentially E that you talked about earlier.
Mm. Mhm.
A lot of hoops is all I'm saying,
Mhm.
and a lot of criteria.
Well, I think let's see if people, prefer to allow the situation where you have the apartment above the garage or not. I'll make a motion, doesn't necessarily mean I'm for it or against it, but I'll make a motion that we change the 18 feet to 25.
I'll second it.
Okay, Jamie.
Yeah.
Yes.
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 Okay, that passes 8-0. Goes on the list of recommendations. Okay, with that, I think maybe we're done with accessory dwelling units, unless somebody else has something else they want to bring up. Moving right along. We talked a little bit about this before, and my recollection of our conversation was that there didn't seem to be much sentiment for doing any of these things. But I wanted to bring it up again to be sure of that before we, call it a day. Review and discuss possible limitations of businesses in the PR district, the pedestrian residential district. Kinds of things that have come up in conversation are limitations on the hours of operation, decibel levels, perhaps only allowing businesses on corner lots, number of businesses per block or per area of some sort, or shrinking the PR district. I'll leave that one down to the item about redrawing the proposed zoning map. But do we want to do any of those things? I think part of the thought was that for conditional uses, Heather could impose any of those restrictions herself on a particular business. And there were hesitation to adopt any of those limitations across the board.
Right.
Yeah.
Was the problem with that.
Right.
You might look at one particular use and say, okay, I would want to say that they can't operate past, 6 p.m. But say every business can't operate beyond 6 p.m. Maybe there goes your neighborhood cafe or your convenience store.
Cut hair.
Yeah.
I would be interested, since we have Nolan, I would be interested, and I don't endorse this. I would be interested, Nolan, if you're prepared to do this. I think you had suggested that some communities limit it to corner lots. I would be interested in hearing more about that. And not because I endorse that, but because I did feel different in character. I'm sorry, that did feel different. Were you able to hear that, Nolan? I apologize. I was saying, okay.
Yes, I was able to hear that. Thank you.
It feels different in character to the other items you just listed off, where we're talking about sort of like when how can it be open? This is specifically a strictly geographical question. And it sounded, Nolan, like maybe you would have some insight into what other communities have done about that.
Right. Yeah. So the rationale, if you were to think about it, the rationale for providing these uses only on corner lots is two things. One, corners are places that typically get more visibility. So you have one road and another road, so you're getting more visibility for that business. So it's more likely that more people are going to see it. The second is that you have potentially more street parking. You do have restrictions of parking near a stop sign, for example, but you have two streets to park on in front of that business. So that adds to the parking capacity on street for that business. The third is that it adds some predictability. So I know that some residents in the PR district, or the potential future PR district, I should say, have expressed concerns about having businesses next door, et cetera. If you added that they could only be located on the corners, it would limit the potential for businesses. However, it would add to predictability. So somebody who was right next to a corner lot would say, yeah, I may be next to a business, but somebody on the interior of a lot would have more predictability that they wouldn't be. So those are some things to think about when limiting them to corner lots. And the predictability thing is part of why some communities have chosen to limit those to corners. And also corner lots are more traditionally the locations for some commercial uses within neighborhoods.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else have any thoughts on limiting it to corner lots, for or against, that we should consider?
If this were to be a hot issue moving forward, I would encourage, say, if we don't want to have much discussion on it, I think that's fine. We're council to discuss it. I mean, some members of council are here today. I might consider them, urge them to consider a phase-in if they were going to go with a corner lot restriction, that they might say, well, if you're going to do that, maybe do that for, say, 5 years. And then to the extent that we're talking about a community that is transitioning into being a little bit more of a mixed use, that gives you a predictable path forward for how to grow, where it happens, and the pace at which it would happen. I don't know that I want to recommend that here from us, but I have done a lot of reading and thinking on that, and I appreciate Nolan's comments. I think they're broadly consistent with.
It could also put target on corner lots, right? So,
Yes.
And I mean, so one of the, again, going back to BG principle is maintaining the character of a community, and there could be a historic house on the corner lot. It could put a lot of pressure on the house to be a business, which they don't want to, and other stuff like that. So there could be predictability in that way, but it also could target those houses also.
I really am, I'm struggling, like, talking about all of this. Look at that back. I'm not comfortable when we're talking about it as property. And then we're also talking about it and I'm right back at that circle. I don't feel comfortable. A corner lot, not a corner lot, a large gas, a small gas, not the same side. Like, I don't want a large gas where my property is right now. It's not appropriate, not okay. But yet my property have to put one on. No, large gas needs to go on the exterior part of our city, not next to the people that are walking in the city. So we're talking about all of this stuff and decide where we're talking about it. Does that make sense?
I think we have decided.
Yeah.
Unless are we going to reopen?
No.
Wasn't intended to
Yeah,
revisit.
so
No.
the choice to not readdress it, we have decided are going.
Okay.
I think, is that a
And we're
fair?
just making recommendations. It's not like what we say is set in cement and that's what's going to happen. So if city council feels that way, they will certainly take it up.
And my only comment with restricting it to, the corner lots is, if we're going to do this in the neighborhood, I think that we should be more open to, if a house in the middle of Church Street, an attorney wants to turn that into their office.
Yeah.
And that's part of the neighborhood feel, then I think that there's value in having less restriction. We can still, we talked about this early on, do we regulate more with, the conditional and permitted uses versus make these pockets of, hey, we can only have business here, we can only have houses here. And, I sent a letter, last week, and the entire context of that letter is about flexibility.
Yep.
And I fully believe that that is, the direction that our town needs for positive growth and not just remaining the same. We've remained the same for a long time, and I think that it's gotten us behind other cities.
I'm with you, Mark. I don't like the corner lot.
I don't either.
Okay.
It's way too restrictive.
Well, let's say if there's a motion and a second, we'll vote on it. If there's not, we'll move on. I'm not hearing
Move on.
anything. Okay. Next one's a small item, but it's bothered me early on. Discuss renaming of the neighborhood commercial zoning area. That word neighborhood implies to people that we're talking about businesses that are located in areas where there's residents on one side and a residents on the other. Another one, some more across the street. And if you look at what the NC zones are, that's not what they are.
Yeah.
They're in, what they are is existing commercial businesses. Like the car dealers on the north end of town. Like the area where you've got the Sunset Bistro and the donut shop and the yoga place. Where you've got Newman's Marathon. All those places are NC zones. There are a few of them that have residential properties very nearby. Most of them don't have any residential properties nearby. But that name that was picked, as much as I like the work you did, Nolan, overall, that neighborhood zoning thing has bothered me right from the start. And it was obvious from many of the comments we got from people in town when we had an open comment period that people were confused about what the neighborhood NC zone was. To my mind, it would be more aptly just described as commercial or limited commercial rather than zone, rather than neighborhood commercial. And I think it would just, it's not a substantive change in the zoning code, but I think it would eliminate a good deal of confusion that exists currently. So
you want a motion just to rename it?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to discuss it first, I will make a motion to rename the NC zone to the limited commercial zone. Because we did put there are a lot of limited uses there.
I will second it. It makes more sense.
It doesn't substantively, but it confuses people. People think the NC zone is what we envision the PR's district to look like. I even asked the question early on of Heather, I remember some weeks ago, a couple of months ago now, what's the difference between the NC zone and the PR district? And it was obvious to me that most people are confused. They think they're the same thing. They're not. They're two different things. One is existing commercial businesses. The other is the concept of integrating small businesses into neighborhoods. If you wanted to use that word neighborhood to describe something, I'd use it for the PR district, not the neighborhood commercial zone. So I'm just trying to make things clear, even though it's not a, the neighborhood
Implies homes.
implies something that's not accurate.
Okay, you have a motion and a
We have a
second.
motion and a second. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. 7-1, it passes. The neighborhood commercial zone is now called the limited commercial zone.
That's That's our recommendation.
That's our recommendation.
Yeah, that's it.
Good point. Okay, consider and discuss redrawing of the proposed zoning map. Again, this was something I don't know that we want to do anything. I kind of doubt it actually. But I thought it's something we should talk about a bit and bring up for discussion. Do we want to try to recommend any changes in the map as it has been originally drawn here?
This is what you were getting to, Erica, right?
It relates to Erica's point.
Did you have an idea of, or a delineation, anything specific, I guess?
Yeah, I would like that little area that all of out of it already what we wanted already. Really don't- Already intermixed. It's already walkable, already residential. Commercial. I mean, I walked today. I see residential. I'm part of two of those properties. So yeah, get it out of there.
But I think what you-
Under the NC?
Yeah.
no, I
no,
think
under the-
you want,
Yes.
you want to get rid of the yard.
Correct,
Are you saying entirely or for that specific area?
for that specific area.
Okay.
For the specific area that we talked about, like the last one, it's already intermixed.
So that's why I'm confused. If it's
Yes.
already that way and it's working
Well, take
today
it out,
and
because
it's,
of
and
the-
it's
yeah.
not, and it's not.
What do we
I don't
call-
think
what do we
that it's
call
working
it?
as well as people think it is, and I.
But you
so-
just said that you
yeah.
walk it every day
Yeah.
and
Yes.
you walk by businesses.
I don't
and-
live
and
there.
We've been doing it.
I don't live there. I own the business. I don't live there. I hear the complaints of the people that are there about my business. So that's what I'm saying.
Just
It's
Well, that,
fine.
their point, though, that it's fine the way it is, goes back to the presumption I was talking to Ms. Baker about, is that you start from the presumption that any business added to those areas is a detriment to the area.
Correct.
And the city administration does not believe that in that premise. We've spent 8
Yeah,
years,
um,
we spent 8 years in
mean-
planning for this.
I don't know what,
but it's-
If we
that's
get,
what they've been asking. That's what. we listen to.
what
That's
do, what if it's not PR, what is it then?
So it'd be, that's what we were talking about. I think R1.
Or we can just
Or
call it
not
historic.
R1, by R2.
What out of
We can just call it historic
that?
because they're old homes. And then it kind of goes and connects to the BG principle of the character of a place, and we can just call it historic. It will.
I gotta pump the brakes on that. That was my biggest fear with the whole historic designation, is making giant chunks of the city historic that are then stuck in time.
Okay, what
And
did you
that
say,
doesn't make any
R1?
sense.
So this is important. That was a different. So Erica is proposing, and I actually think it's worth moving to see if there's a second. And if there is, then we can vote on it, so we can address it and then move on.
Can I ask just for some specificity? and-
So
Yes,
that's what I'm gonna
yes,
say.
what we're getting.
So what Erica is suggesting, if, I'm sorry, I wish I had it bigger, but this existing neighborhood commercial pocket in the, or in a few spots in PR district. So that's your, where it used to be railroad or the place on North Grove, right? There's a pocket of neighborhood commercial. She's saying, don't touch those. Those are there today. Those are businesses today. But she's saying all of this pink PR goes away. So that the businesses remain. You take away the PR, you convert it to, for ease of reference, can we still say R2 right now? This would be, I think, R2 today. So the motion we're one to make it would be to eliminate PR district from the map and to convert to R2. Wouldn't touch the neighborhood commercial. Those.
Can you give me some roads?
Yeah, we need to
Yeah.
have
Yeah,
a
we need
specific
some-
area.
Well, I
So
don't, well,
it's-
I guess I don't, now, I could be wrong here, but I don't think you do. Because what I'm saying to you is if it says PR right now, you're changing it to R.
Well, you've got to have some boundaries of what area you're talking
Taking the
about. or
whole-
else
you're
You're
talking
taking the
about the
whole
entire-
PR district and making it R2.
I am personally am not. But
Right. Yeah, well,
Okay, well, I mean,
believe
what
that
you're
is-
suggesting is that we throw out this zoning code and start over with a new zoning code and say we've spent $100,000
She's
for
saying
nothing.
throw out the option to be able to have new business go in those neighborhoods
Correct.
And then
Oh.
Leave it the way it is.
compartmentalize our entire code again.
I would say devil's advocate again, I am not, for this, but you could argue, we did do work on what is now the limited commercial to facilitate growth and conversion to residential. So it is not that we're locking. I do think we are locking in backwards trajectory, but it is not locking it. Didn't make changes to that commercial.
And I do understand that. And I think we can address this in different ways rather than changing it. But I think there's another issue. We do have some written comments about residents who are living in NC. Now we change it to limited commercial who are not here today, right? So I mean, a lot of people do have problems being around commercial, right? So if the problem is with, which is kind of goes back to the circle, if the problem is with the businesses, we should not be conditional to people who are in PR. That should also apply to people who are living next to commercials or potentially making them commercial, right? So
I do want to push back gently on that. I think, and I could be wrong, I think that this is intended today. There should be no one living in a commercial, is that right? Today?
no, around the businesses.
Right.
Right.
But that would be, but that exists today either way. I think you should make your motion. I think you want to potentially move something different. And I just want to make sure it's addressed before we move on by.
I mean, what I'm trying to do is, or say is there, I mean, there is a lot of, I mean, if we are changing the essence of the code, we have to be very systematic about it. Just changing, let's go back to make it R1 would not change the nature of the problem we're trying to face. The nature of the problem is that people don't want to be around businesses. And we are taking a position that people are okay being around businesses because they're living around businesses. I think I think we can go to, I don't know, but we could address these concerns in a little different way rather than just changing, okay, let's not call it PR, let's call it R1, but still the businesses will remain there, right? So we are kind of, well, I think we have to kind of look at the problem, and the problem is that it's not that all, the problem is that there are two problems. One is that when I buy the house, I buy my house being around a residential complex or place. And if you're changing the codes, there's a fear that will change the character of the place, right? So now suddenly I'm forced to live next to the business. That's the number one problem. And we can address that problem. The number two problem is that all businesses are the same. And we know that all businesses are not the same. And we want to have good businesses, which increases, going back to BG7 principle, vibrance and other kind of things. And we want to limit negative players, right? So all we're trying to do through this is limit negative play. Is it through ADU? Is it through bed and breakfast? Is it through zoning and all? What we are trying to do is limit the bad players so that people's livability is not affected negative, right? And I can discuss some of my comments which are on the agenda, but I think we can limit this by doing different things, because whatever we name it, the problem will essentially remains the same. Because it's a euphemism. We're just making it now in R1, right? So we could do different things to limit and going back, being true to the 7 principle of BG. It may take some work.
Again.
Well, for example, one of the ways is having some kind of say of residents of what kind of businesses they're allowed to have and what not to have, rather than we deciding that this business going to be okay.
I don't. Large residential. Again, I'm back to yes. If I sell my property, happy based on the that we are going to vote on, somebody can come in a large garage. That's
Sure.
That's what I want.
Is that a permitted unconditional use?
No, it's a permitted use under PR.
Is it a conditional use?
Well, we make everything
It
a
has-
conditional,
it
it's a
has to
guarantee,
be-
but
This would have to be, you have it.
All
You
right,
have
and-
it.
I mean, somebody just can't put down any kind of business they want to.
and I totally
Oh, wow.
understand that. However, what I'm trying to say is, based on some of our conditional uses, one of the was that it has to happen. And all of you under assumption, no residential or no area over in that residential area is big enough. There are lots big enough.
I'm with you. I'm saying if we add one more condition to that, and that is that the residents should be allowing a certain permission of that particular use. So for instance, if residents don't want, even if it's conditional, residents don't want a large gas station, the large gas station shouldn't be there, because residents should have a say in the process of.
That's what I'm trying to do right now. I'm
And-
trying to listen to everything. I'm trying to say, we can do something now. So what, don't want to rezone it, don't rezone it. Want to start with around right now, the NCR. That's in the section right now, where it says, and
Limited commercial.
Limited
Are you-
commercial.
Are you, we're confused down here. Are you talking about the limited commercial or the pedestrian residential? Or
we're
the
talking about
automobile
the pedestrian
refueling?
residential, that all of
Okay. Pedestrian residential, a automobile refueling station is not conditional or permitted.
Yeah.
It's only conditional in the limited commercial, which would then go to the planning director to go through the elements that we discussed in her discretion, whether to allow it. And I wouldn't think that would apply based on impact to the neighbors and so forth.
that was. Talking about property.
Sure. Is
I
there,
think
is there,
people were under the impression property. That is
is there something else on our use table that we need to address then? Or minute or?
So can I take a hypothetical case?
Sure.
So for instance, having a cafe,
I'm sorry.
having a cafe in a PR. So Bittenwood Street, somebody wants to put a cafe in the current use, it will be allowed to have a cafe in the PR district, right? Cafes are allowed. What I'm arguing is kind of on lines to what Erica is arguing is if the residents in that neighborhood, I'm not talking about the whole district, in the neighborhood don't want the cafe to be there, that cafe shouldn't be there.
And how do we go about,
Are you gonna have a vote? Or I don't know how I understand how a zoning code would work with
Maybe they need
voting
certain.
on every business or.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I
gotta
just
be-
don't-
that's
I
not-
just don't see
It's
where
already
any
a
small
slog to get
sections of the
through.
public vote on every
No.
proposal.
That's-
I think that brings up a topic that is fair to bring up, is that, if there are a handful or a certain percentage of homeowners in the neighborhood that do not want the coffee shop to open, doesn't mean that there's not a higher percentage or more people that want it. And, in these meetings, I think it's fair to say that there are individuals that live in these neighborhoods now that like walking to a bar or to a barber shop or to their local law firm, right? They like it. So just because we haven't heard from them doesn't mean that they don't exist.
Right.
And I think that's something that we can't overlook, is that there are people that do like it and they do want it. And it's very common in these types of situations when somebody agrees with a new law or a new piece of the code, they don't come to tell us they agree with it. They just agree with it. And they don't show up to tell us they agree with it. So I don't believe that everybody that lives there wants to not have it as PR. I don't believe that.
I totally, agree. That's not what we're, and I like it, might not, I'm, I like.
We haven't had one person come say they like it. They're not showing up.
I like it. I like it. I love where I'm at. I love walking to work. I love walking to bars. I love walking to
Then
the
why
clubs.
would that change?
Because I'm listening to you and I'm why we can't make some kind of compromise. That's what I'm saying. Make a compromise. Why start with higher
You
area?
didn't make a compromise. You want to take the whole thing away.
Well, then
That's not a
let's
compromise.
just start step by step then. Let's take one block and see. Let's take block. Let's not take it all the way. Let's not raise all of it.
Mark, I'll say it a little more direct. Which I understand what you're saying. But what Eric, I think we need to understand is that we as a planning commission have heard from a handful of people. I don't know that that's the community. I think that's those handful of people's opinion. Right, and that's Mark's point though. While I respect their opinions, I I strongly disagree that businesses in all forms are all bad anywhere in a residential area. I think that's pretty clear on.
Mr. Wilson, you
this-
need to be quiet.
On this commission.
No comments.
In addition, I think we address them differently. I understand where you're at, but I think we address them through the uses. And that's, like when we did it, I'm happy to revisit it if there's something we missed or something that needs to be viewed again. But I don't know how we toss out or start drawing lines, or we could look at changing something specific as far as how we've zoned specific areas or blocks. So be it. That's potentially legitimate discussion. I flesh that out, but we need some specificity, not just blow it up.
Okay,
'cause
now,
if starting over doesn't make
Let me
sense.
throw this out on the table that is specific that I've thought about, and I don't know that I'm necessarily for it, but I'm going to throw it out there on the table as a suggestion when we're talking about what you're just addressing, the specific areas. I would at least consider taking the PR district on the west end of town and drawing a line at Maple Street, north and south. So the streets that would get you to the perimeter of the limited commercial district that's there. And things north of that, which would include Goral and Eberly, would then be excluded from the PR district. So the streets going westward from Main Street, Grove, Prospect Grove, Buttonwood, Maple would be part of the PR district. You go farther west than that, and they wouldn't. That's a straight line. It would even up the two sides, east and west of Main Street, more so than it is now. Current map shows a protrusion into the west side that doesn't exist on the east side. It's only a couple of blocks, but it is, like I said, something that made some sense to me that I'm just putting out there for the rest of you to consider and comment on. I'm not making a motion at this point. But there is some logic to it, I think.
My
Do we know?
recollection was that I think we'd said Nolan had picked this based on where sidewalks were. Is that right? That these were already walkable now? Is that consistent with everyone else's recollection? 'Cause I agree, Bob. I mean, visually, right? There,
Yeah.
it is a little, I will say on the east side, there's a natural run up against, at least for part of it, there's the inverse.
So at least it's something specific. Does everyone on the commission understand what I'm talking about here? Did I make it clear enough?
It looks like there's a couple.
You just decrease the size.
Just decrease the size a
Yeah,
bit.
based on so you would, what you did, so like Acre, Everly, Goral, going west, but not part of.
Right, stop it at Maples.
Or you have to draw a line somewhere.
Yeah, you
right?
do.
But others who are not living in that will say the same thing, right? So we, I mean, and I understand all the concerns. I'm saying is maybe there is overhearing of the ones who are able to express themselves, but we have comments about NC and people are saying that they don't want to live next to NC as well. So, I mean, we're just kind of, again, to me, we're just kind of treating a symptom and not the problem here. Then somebody will say, well, what about the next street? Why did you cut it that way? And I would rather trust the map, which is made by a professional, rather than just deciding that this looks.
Okay, I didn't make a motion.
Sure, I'm
Put it out there for comment. If
think
there's
it's
a
worth-
complete lack of support, I won't make a motion. If there does seem to be a lot of support, I might.
I think there is a presumption that's worth each of us exploring it internally. If you buy a property, live in the property, it is not necessarily the case that you then get to assume that the way things were when you bought it
We'll stay there.
is the way it shall be forever.
Right.
Now, you can also think that actually, no, I bought it and I have a reasonable expectation that the neighborhood that I bought it in will be that way into the future. I'm happy to say, publicly, that's not how society works, right? Towns develop, cities develop, grow. Things that were once a barn become a historic building 100 years later. We have to keep those considerations in mind as we go. But I think it's misleading for us to suggest to anyone that we are not going to facilitate growth in things that are today not areas with business. We are explicitly not endorsing the model of we put businesses over there and we put the houses over here. Like we've done that for a while. We're not doing it, or we are, it seems, not going to do it. And I don't want to mislead anyone that we should be explicit about that. We like businesses and residences coexist. We think it's a good idea. Now we have to be careful about it. But I mean, I would like for us to start, for some folks to start making some motion, address some of these concerns, because I think we should speak with a voice. If it's not going to be unanimous, and that's okay. I think we should vote on this stuff to say, no, we want to keep the PR. We want to keep some of these things. Because I think we got to start moving.
Yeah. I agree with almost everything you said there, Will, personally. Erica, I guess we're at a point where I thought I heard you suggesting that we do away with the PR district and make all of that, make everything that's in the PR district R2.
But I
Do
did
you
like
want-
your suggestion. Premise. I agree. That's exactly. Path of business college already happening. We're already down for a overall growth. So let's start with our premise and reduce already happening. So what our goal is, they're already property.
But they're limited to this. That's the whole
Right,
purpose
right
of
now,
this, is
that's
to
not
open
an
it up.
opportunity for somebody to do right.
Right.
Or growth
Correct.
unless, yeah.
Correct. Unless you decide
So
to
that's what
use
you're
until you
saying. Let's
until you
shove more
retire.
I'm not saying shove more business. I mean, that's up to the business owner. If I'm a business owner and I do my homework, I know whether or not my has a demand or it doesn't have a demand. Like they're not going to just open a business because I'm allowed to, right? There has to be a demand for it.
No offense,
It's-
but
it's
there
in-
are a lot
it's-
of
that's in-
businesses,
that's
Mark,
in
that
every
people
city.
do
That's
have
in
that
every city.
mentality.
Then they'll fail.
But I'd still rather see somebody try than not try because we said, hey, you're not allowed to try. Still rather see you try.
Not try.
But if we take some of this
Outskirts.
away, we are.
Out, like a farther.
Let's move on.
Okay, I guess at this point I'd ask, does anybody want to make a motion regarding the topics we've been discussing for the last 20 minutes or so? If there's no motion, then we move on.
Let's move on.
Then I do want to make a motion to recommend this map to council as
Second.
Take out.
Recommend the map as is to city
Recommended as
council.
is.
Yeah.
Okay, we had a motion and a second.
Yes.
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 No,
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-1. That gets us to the last item on the agenda tonight. It's only a quarter to what, 9?
9.
I hope that's 9. And that is, Abhishek went to a lot of work a few weeks ago to produce about 3 different documents to us. And I have mentioned to at least a couple of you that I wanted to take the one document where he categorized the various comments we had received into categories based on the subject matter involved. And I want to use that document at our September meeting as kind of a somewhat of a final check to make sure we've covered everything we want to cover. So I thought that paper did a very good job, a good way of looking at all the comments we've received from the public by subject matter category. So that particular document, I'd advise all of you to look at before the next meeting in September. And we'll go through that at that point. And maybe I think with most of those items, we'll say, well, we've already addressed that. We're done with that item. But it's sort of a final check. What I wanted to do tonight was to look at the document where he had, I'm trying to think what it was entitled, and find mine here, about his thoughts on my thoughts about zoning code document. And Nolan, you made some comments in regard to Abhishek's email about that. So we'll bring you into the conversation here too. I don't know that there's anything in particular to do here, but he obviously put a lot of work and thought into this, and I thought we ought to at least discuss it for a bit. First item that came up in there was talking about parking spaces. And I think, Abhishek, you were concerned about mobility that people who are disabled or perhaps poor have, and the lack of parking spaces might make it difficult for them to get around.
Right. And that was an issue. Another issue was kind of some of these. So the way I did was I kind of classified all the comments into different categories, and some of which I also personally have those kind of concerns, and parking space was one, and mobility was one issue with the parking space. Another issue was about the pressure on the street for the residents who are living it if there is a business there. So it was a kind of a two-part issue. And I kind of, when I talk about the parking space, and I do agree we need to reduce the parking space because, of course, as an eyesore, but we have to be careful with our demography of people who are living in the town. And we do have more seniors, and we do have a higher poverty rate than some of the comparable documents which were given, for example, urban Maine. So that was one issue I kind of wanted to bring in the place. I am overall, I mean, I can go through it, but I felt that we need to have certain amount of parking space for businesses, if not in the business, but around the business somewhere they can park. For instance, if somebody wants to have an art gallery on Court Street, they can park at the court, right? So there is some amount of sharing of parking and stuff like that, rather than having all the cars in the street, which will reduce negative effect to the residents. So when I was looking at all these when I look at these news articles, what I want to compare is like, how does this apply to my community, right? So this may have worked in Buffalo, but Buffalo is very different from Bowling Green, right? And the reason why it worked in a particular area may not be the reason why it will work here. So hence we have to have a little bit more considerations when we are kind of going through these blanket of changes, right? So that's kind of the rationale of my thoughts. But I don't know about how we want to do it, but I can go through it. We can discuss it, however we want to do it. There are Nolan comments, which I agree to most of them. I do have some counter comments, but it's like more like larger issues, which I found based on the comments of the people and my own comments rather than various. I think Will did a great job looking at the documents. I'm looking at more aerial view to it. What will it do to the neighborhoods?
It's hard for any of us to know how it affects the neighborhood. I don't hear any cities that are increasing parking. It's not happening. So, you know, I don't know why we restrictive from that sense. Well, I think you can drive around, whether it's in our district or a limited commercial district. And I think we can all agree that we've got concrete parking lots that don't. We've been, as a country, we've been way too restrictive with the amount of parking required.
Right.
Sure.
What's that?
It is not
It is.
like you have to have parking spaces, have proper
Can
mix
hold.
of that property.
Yeah.
And so it's not. I think we're like one of the last large size cities that have parking on.
But here's the thing, right? The reason why we do have it is because we do have a lot of senior population.
I'm saying I like the parking. I
Right,
do. I
right,
do.
right. And what I'm arguing is, and I kind of want to push back about this, is like, so I'm not saying, hey, have hundreds of slots. Like, I'm not obviously saying like make a Home Depot. Of course not. Of course, I do understand that it's cost, it's eyesore, and I agree with all of this. What I'm arguing is what it can do is reduce the negative effect of residents living in this business. So for instance, if we say, okay, I don't know, if you have 20 chairs in your cafe, you need to have 2 parking spots dedicated or 3 parking spots dedicated for that business. What it will do is at least there are just 3, they can park there, and it will reduce the negative impact of parking on the street for other residents. So, that's what I'm arguing. What I'm also arguing is that all this, what I have read about increasing the mobility argument, it doesn't. Reducing parking space doesn't increase mobility. It just doesn't. Somebody who's used to driving a car will drive to the car, right? So I just want to take that out argument completely and make an argument that it is about environment, like saving the space in it, rather than like, okay, let's make people work and walk and they will be more fit now. Because there's no research doesn't support that at all.
Well, as sort of an overview, what I hear you saying and what I see happening currently is that our old zoning code has these very restrictive parking requirements that require many more spaces than anybody would logically need.
Right.
We're talking about going to a zoning code that doesn't have any requirement at all. We're going from overly restrictive to nothing. And I hear Abhishek saying there should be something a little bit in between, leaning toward the no parking requirement end of the scale, but not all the way to no parking requirement whatsoever.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the overview of what I hear you.
And I'm saying is also have a more flexible approach to it. If there is already existing parking space somewhere nearby across the street, that's totally fine. And, if a businesses can say, okay, you can park across the street and you can cross the street, we have 1 or 2 slots here, that's cool, man. You don't need to have parking right in front of the business. Have a little bit more flexible approach, but having no parking will, I think, would lead to a lot of problems, especially having issues about poverty and also issues about pressure on the residents.
So I can add a little bit to the conversation. I feel like we should kind of take a step back and see what our zoning code says now. So right now, we currently have 2 districts that do not require parking. So I think that's a perfect way to start, is downtown working. Yes, there's public lots there, but we also have the new B5 transitional central business district that doesn't require parking. And it's brought in new businesses because we've removed those parking requirements. But the business owner is still, I guess I'll say what Tropical Smoothie is. There's no parking requirements there, but
we couldn't have done that development if we had to meet the B2, the previous zoning. We couldn't have built it. That's been a positive addition to the city.
but the owners still took it upon themselves to redevelop that parcel as best they could and add parking for people going in and out as much as they could. And they also off-site park.
Supported of building ahead of the bus.
Yeah.
And we never really recognized in our code that there's other modes of transportation besides vehicles. And so that's the transformation with the zoning code and other zoning codes across the country, is recognizing that not everybody has a car, not everybody wants a car. So how can we modernize our code? And that was step one, reducing parking. And at this point, we started with square one, which is, why do we need them? Why does the city dictate that? Because we're not the business owner. We don't know the market of Culver's restaurant. We don't know the market of, the Tropical Smoothie. But second to that was we had no bicycle rack parking requirements. And we felt like, well, that would be an important component to getting someone to a business safely, whether it be walking or using a bicycle. So I feel like I want to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture there and not focusing on vehicles, because that's been the concern of many zoning codes, is that we've took these model zoning codes, planned everything around the vehicle, and what have we gotten ourselves into? We've gotten these suburban strip commercial areas where it's very difficult to walk and ride your bike safely. And adding to that, oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
No, you're good. No, please go ahead.
No, I lost my train of thought. But there's a lot of articles, I was just going to say, about where it's been done very successfully. And I just wanted to point to where we currently have districts where I feel it's working. And I'm not advocating either way. I just know in my office, it's been a big problem trying to work with businesses that really want to be in Bowling Green and can't meet the parking requirements.
Yeah, and I know Nolan's response to Abhishek's writing emphasized the flexibility it gives the business owner
Right.
if there's no parking required.
And to follow up on that, and the most recent examples are Market Square that we did, and then where the Tropical Smoothie is. And both of those have a residential component. And in both situations, we have tenant residents that have no parking. So when we lease those spaces, they have no parking space whatsoever. And both of those properties are two of the first 3 properties that we fill up every single year. So I say that in that is a really good example of what people want, right? Like I think they want it. They're not worried about having parking.
I hear you, Mark, but it's the same argument which you made few minutes ago. We only hear things which have worked. There are several examples where parking was an issue and other, so you're taking successful cases and telling me there are cases which it is an issue, right? Right, that the residents are a problem. I mean, there's a parking issue because of that, right? There will be cases. I don't know myself, but you're taking one successful case, there will be another non-successful case as well. When we are having some amounts of rules, we want to be uniform about it. That's my larger argument here.
I think what I'm hearing is, Abhishek here, am I correct that you are more concerned about the pedestrian residential district than obviously downtown and whatever other commercial type spaces are what they are? It's really the PR.
PR.
And the parking with respect to PR.
Yes.
Thought there, I mean, it's in the, for conditional uses, it's one of the mentioned items. Of course, there's a including but not limited to, one of the mentioned items is parking provision. And how that will impact the 5 items, we made it 6, that the city will, the planning director will review when making conditional use, approving a conditional use. So there's already that, they're kind of built in specifically for that purpose, I think, that consideration. So in conjunction with giving the flexibility to the business owner, knowing your clientele, knowing who you're attracting, and multiple layers, of approval process has to go through. I think it's kind of addressed.
Sure. I just wanted to make it explicit again, like, from a larger overview point of it, right? It made.
I wanted to thank you for a lot of the stuff that you shared. I did not consider the code from the perspective that you highlighted. And it made me kind of think about it a little bit and question myself. I will push back gently on one point, which is to say that I agree that people who drive to Kroger today from where they live, they're going to drive to Kroger next year, right? I mean, that's how it is. But when you couple the perspective you have here with the don't allow many businesses to come up into PR district, right? You are locking in that they have that same distance to travel. And I think the point in part for us is to say, yeah, you know what? They drive to they drive to Starbucks today. They drive to Grounds for Thought today. But in part, I think the premise here is tomorrow that little coffee shop that they would walk because it's 2 blocks instead of a half. The kind of thing that I always walk, but I respect it. But if it was like right next door, a lot of people walk, right?
But here's the problem, though. People can come from far off and come
That's
to
right.
that. So we are assuming that the clientage to that coffee shop is only the locals, but a good coffee shop, people will come from Perrysburg as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think what I'm saying is different ways to address the disabled and or the poor. The one is to, we have certain requirements like parking requirements. Another is to say, bring the, and I think what we're trying to do is facilitate bringing the business to them. But I will say that I looked at things differently once I read what you had put down here, because I had not really thought much about that, to be frank. I really appreciated not just your perspective, but like, you know what you're talking about, you know what I mean? Like there is some real research that went
Well,
in.
I mean, here's another thing, right? Like, and I don't want this to be too professorial lecture, which is what I do for my work, but but how many poor and how many disabled and seniors are going to the businesses? I have seen, I go to Kermit's and I've seen, seniors on their wheelchair, like they're dragging it all where, I mean, that's the, but how often is it happening? So when you talk about businesses, we're talking about high paying, not high, but like PG high paying capacity. And we forget the silent ones who are just can't afford to because, they can't walk there. And we do know that PR and especially urban sprawl, is all a new thing now. It's only the riches which is going back to the downtown and wants to be near to the downtown. So there is a change in the demographic of people who want to walk and have community gardens and can walk to the cafe because it's a luxury.
Right. And
health is a luxury.
So I agree with that 100%. Similar to when we had a vote on, I think it was the outdoor entertainment and noise provision last month. What I pushed back hard on was the idea that this is a real problem elsewhere. I think that's probably where I land stuff as well. But I agree with everything you just said. I don't know that the zoning code is the right or the best vehicle to address those issues versus, or put it differently. If you want to fight poverty, do I start with the zoning code? Probably not. It doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it, and that's why I appreciate your perspective. But I think for me, probably else to start.
I will totally disagree with that. But I'll just stop there.
Yeah. That's good. No, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay.
The next item on Abhishek's paper or email was mixed land use, which we've talked a lot about tonight. I don't know that we need to rehash what we've already discussed. There are, there are points to be made and different points of view. Certainly, your approach, Abhishek, to that topic is different than Mark's and Will's by quite a bit. People just agree and I disagree sometimes. And what I appreciate about the way this has worked so far, everybody's disagreed quite respectfully.
Yeah.
We haven't hurled insults back and forth.
We're just kicking each other under the table here.
Well, the way a discussion is supposed to take place. But there is quite a difference in a point of view of some people versus others on this subject of mixed land use. And the folks in the audience have a different view than some of us up here as well. I don't know that there's more to be said at this point. Seems like we've talked about it quite a bit. You okay with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So you'd appreciate if we wound it up. Huh? Okay, we're getting there. We're doing pretty well getting through the agenda tonight. The next one, the more sustainable BG. You do bring up the topic of backyard chickens, which came up when I was on city council
with the zoning board.
For quite some time, we talked about backyard chickens. And it's a viable concept that some communities have adopted and others haven't. But I don't think it's for us to insert it into the zoning code that's been given to us to review unless city council asks us to. The city council came back and said, yeah, we're interested in doing backyard chickens. Here's a proposed ordinance. What do you think about it? Then I think we would review it. But for us to go to them and say, well, we've decided we want backyard chickens. I don't think that's within our scope of duties. But I was against it before, but it's a viable concept. Like I say, some communities do it. So I just don't think it gets initiated with us. Home sharing, bed and breakfast. This had to do with when we extended the time period a person can stay at a bed and breakfast.
Yes.
So we did address this topic.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Okay. And AUDs, ADUs, we've discussed tonight, taking care of that. I think we are all set. Okay, where does that leave us? I think our September meeting, we need to set a public hearing, Heather, for one thing. That was on the schedule for September, so we'll just have that as part, we can do that just as part of our meeting or our regular meeting, or does it have to be separate and apart from the meeting?
It would be on your agenda if you go ahead and set that officially and that date would be. Do you know, Jamie, off the top of your head?
And so you're saying a public hearing to accept,
A public hearing for people to comment again to us about where we are now that we're almost through with the process.
but we're not done with the process.
We're not done with the process.
September
I'd
7th.
still like to have a
We want
conversation.
to go through the checklist of items.
Yep.
And I know you want to talk about height restrictions.
And Mark had sent an email too. I don't know if you want to touch
We
on
don't
that.
need to address it
Okay.
tonight. As long as we have another meeting, then I'm great.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll do that. What date is that, Jamie? September 7th is 2 days after Labor Day? Okay, we'll have a public hearing on September 7th and we'll wind this up hopefully and pass it on to City Council. Is there anything else for the good of the order tonight? Okay, with that, I made a motion to adjourn. Judy
I'll second.
seconded. It passed 8-0.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Thank you very
Nolan.
much.